What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. And you know what? I actually think I probably crashed out every single car in this parking lot trying to lose the police. Who would have thought? But I did actually want to make this video a long time ago, and with the possible last update coming for Need for Speed Unbound probably soon, I actually was like, you know what? Let's compare the fundamental designs of Unbound compared to Need for Speed Heat. Now, I do understand that both games are probably going to be a lot different than each other. They're also going to be years apart, and we can agree that, well, Need for Speed Heat was kind of cut short. Probably going to be fairly obvious when looking at the actual game design itself. But even then, though, I still feel like Need for Speed Heat did a lot of things better than Need for Speed Unbound. Now, we all do know for a fact right now that Need for Speed Unbound's completely owning Heat in one thing, and that is, of course, going to be the initial multiplayer design and the amount of updates it has gotten. I mean, let's be real, guys, the last 3 or 4 Need for Speeds or so have barely even gotten updates, so it's actually nice to see Unbound getting some love. Now, the question is, will this game get another update? Only time is most likely going to tell on that, but I actually did want to see which game is actually going to be better with their fundamental design, and to really see in some areas how one game actually did better than the other one, which I think we can all agree that is most likely going to happen. On top of that, guys, I'm actually going to make another video in the near future going over what I think the next Need for Speed game needs, and some of the design changes that game probably needs to actually be great. Now, the first thing I did want to talk about here with both games is going to come down to something fairly simple. That is going to be the single player and the multiplayer being together and or separated. We all do know right now a lot of players might look at Unbound and go, well, the single player is kind of fun, but everybody's on multiplayer, bro. No one cares about it. Well, here's the issue with that. What if players actually want to be on single player, race and stuff like that, make a ton of money, buy some of their cars, and then go in multiplayer and use them? Well, guess what? You actually can't use any of the cars. Now, I did actually notice one thing about Unbound that I think they actually did decently on, and that is going to be the fact that when you are completing challenges in single player, you actually get the money on multiplayer on top of it, at least I did anyway. And the funny thing is, going on to multiplayer, I legitimately had, I think it was 15 cars, I think, when I went on multiplayer. Mind you, I never even touched it. So at least in some ways you are unlocking stuff being in single player, so you're not going to go into multiplayer all that time down the road and have nothing, which I think is, I guess, pretty decent. But the initial design, I think, would have been so much better if they did it like Need for Speed Heat. Have everything in one thing. You can play by yourself, do single player, make money, buy cars, and then go in multiplayer with your friends, race around in those said cars that you did buy. That way, if you actually did want to go on single player and do some races by yourself, make money, chill, throw on some music, and kind of just vibe, you can actually do it. On Need for Speed Unbound, though, if you get on single player, you're not going to get any progress on multiplayer, and I really do feel like that is such a terrible design, man. Instead of only having to do multiplayer, what if you don't actually enjoy it? What if the biggest thing you actually want to do is grind out in single player, make a ton of money, then buy the cars you want, and then just jump into multiplayer and play with your friends and have a great time? Thing is, if you actually wanted to do that on Unbound, well, you are most likely going to have to jump into the playlist and multiplayer and stuff and actually race against players and end up to actually make money that way, do the challenges, and I would say players might not actually want to do it. Now, this is actually going to bring me into the next thing I did want to talk about, which is going to be the payouts in single player and how the single player design in Unbound was honestly pretty awful. The reason why I do say this is, for one, it's going to be incredibly random how it is designed. For one, if you actually jump in, you might see some races with $80,000. You're then going to see some races for $3,000, and you actually have to drive like a B-rated vehicle, an A-rated vehicle, and you're going to go make yourself 10 grand, man. Does that sound fun? Probably not, because that's not going to do anything when cars are costing $500, $1 million, $2 million to buy them. What is doing a race making $3,000 from it going to do for you? You can barely even buy rims with that, man. Like, that just doesn't work. And the funny part is, if you actually wanted to do the events, you can grind them out. Yes, it is going to be random. You know what the best part is? Even if the race is giving you 80 grand, you still have to pay 20,000 to get into it. So you're actually only making maybe 55 or 60 from it. You can also spend like $1,000 or 2 grand or whatever and bet on like someone else. You'll make like an extra 2,000. That's kind of dope. But again, if you're only making $57,000 out of a race from doing it, that is actually going to be considered a high stakes event where you make more, when the other races might be paying 25, 30,000, grinding out money in single player is probably going to be an absolute nightmare. I really did not understand why they did end up doing Unbound this way because it did not make any sense. I remember playing something like Need for Speed Payback, Need for Speed Heat, and those are going to be designed to where you can grind out the races, make money. You can find your favorite races and make 50, 60, $70,000 from them. Grind them out. Now, I do understand in Heat that if you actually do the same race, it will go down each time. But funny thing is, just go back to the garage and come back out, and boom, all the races are still going to be high priced again. You can grind them again. You can make well over $1 million doing one daytime run in Heat without an issue. Can you make $1 million in Unbound in one actual day? Definitely not. I think the most I've actually made is maybe 300K, maybe 280,000. That's with everything being active, like the actual car delivery missions, or at nighttime you can do like the delivery missions with police and all that. You might make anywhere from $5,000 to 40 grand from those, but again, it is completely random. I really do think if they're actually going to do a design on single player, don't make it randomized. This was something I did not understand when playing Unbound. Like, everybody loved Payback the way they did it. Everybody loved how Heat did it, to where you can jump in, make money, grind it out. And yeah, you can go find your favorite races and then enjoy those, grind those out, find some other races and stuff. But if you get on Unbound, it is going to be completely randomized on which events actually give you money in them. And I feel like that is just not a great way to do that. A lot of players are like, okay, so I jump into daytime, I make 100 grand. I go into nighttime, and you're probably going to make around 200 grand, maybe 250. But again, depending on what the events pay. I have actually had runs to where I barely make 70,000. And the funny part is, there is no way I was actually going to go back in and do some of the events that pay 3 or 4 or even $5,000. Like, what is the actual point of doing that? It's just going to waste time, so go back in and then go back into nighttime and try to make more money and stuff like that. But I just feel like it's going to be way more tedious. As I did mention earlier, you can easily make over $1 million in Need for Speed Heat in one daytime run without an issue. Like, it is legitimately that easy to do it. If you actually wanted to make over $1 million on Need for Speed Unbound, though, at least on single player, you are legitimately going to have to do a full week of nighttime and daytime to normally reach that amount of money. So it is going to take longer. And I feel like that's why people are like, well, so much for single player. Might as well only play multiplayer. Now, I do understand they were probably focusing on multiplayer only, which I guess kind of makes sense. I mean, that's going to be like a small dev team and all that, so I do get it on why they're probably focusing all of their resources on something like multiplayer. That does make a lot more sense. Adding all kinds of game modes into it, new things to do for people, like, I actually get it. Funny thing is, though, a lot of people on X and Instagram and stuff were like, yo, can we please have more single player stuff? When is all this stuff going to go to single player? Because people like racing on their own. One of the biggest things I had noticed, especially with this, is after Test Drive came out, a lot of people are like, wait a minute, I have to race with people, I have to? Why can't I just do the races solo? Like, people actually want to race by themselves and not always having to do it in a multiplayer aspect. Now, this is actually going to bring me into the next thing I did want to talk about in this video, which is going to be the overall police design in Need for Speed Heat and Need for Speed Unbound. Which one did it better? Well, to be honest, I'm going to give you guys a fast answer and then explain why I think that is. Need for Speed Heat did it better, I said it. Now, this is going to be the reason why, though. If you look at something like Unbound, that yes, the police are everywhere, you are going to see them on Heat, but the difference, though, is on daytime and Heat, they don't bother you, which they don't really bother you in Unbound either, unless you actually start doing events and you actually start getting a Heat level every time you do any event around the map. So if you drive a B, A-rated vehicle, you might go up like a half a thing for like the Heat, or 1, 2, even 3 for that matter, goes all the way up to 5. And then once you're actually done with those set events and you're actually on Heat level 4 or Heat level 5, you then go into nighttime. You can actually do the high stake events and some of the higher level events, which many of them actually require you to have at least a Heat level 3 or higher to even do them. And that's going to make a lot of players go, okay, so I have to do the higher leveled races. Why would I actually go back and do the races for $2,000 or $3,000 in a B-rated vehicle when all the cops are legitimately going to be everywhere? This was actually a complaint I saw guys years ago talking about Unbound and single player, to where, you know how there's legitimately cops everywhere in Heat, like they sit in different places, or you're driving, they might spawn in or something like that? That's not that big of an issue. In Unbound, on the other hand, though, there is legitimately cops everywhere. Now, I'm probably going to guess right now and say people are going to be like, well, why, Block? Why are you complaining, bro? This says Need for Speed. Well, yes, it is Need for Speed, but can I please drive 25 feet without getting a cop on me every time I go anywhere? Because there's going to be the Ford Raptor cops legit scattered everywhere. On top of that, you're then going to see the Interceptor units that are basically just driving around, minding their own business on a beautiful Sunday night drive at nighttime because, daytime they're not out unless you get yourself into some serious trouble. But I would say players, if they were using a lower level vehicle, you are not going to want to use them. On top of that, you basically have to have the upgrade on your car that doubles like the distance to where they can spot you, because if you don't, if you're cruising around, they are basically going to get you every single time, especially in a lower leveled vehicle. Like, you're basically doomed. Like, try driving around a B-rated vehicle around the map on level 5 at nighttime. It is not a fun experience. The cars are barely quick enough to get away from the cones. Like, it's kind of annoying, I'm not gonna lie. Now let's flip back over to Need for Speed Heat for a second. So you can basically drive daytime on that game legitimately all day and do events. If you actually did want police, yeah, you can run into them if you would like to, or you actually jump into nighttime and then the actual fun begins. You can do races, get your heat level up. There's normally going to be police everywhere, and I actually found it to be a lot more fun racing at nighttime in heat. Like, going against the police and stuff like that, I feel like is going to be a better experience overall. You're not going to have like the interceptor units and stuff like that. I think they're kind of annoying. Yeah, you're not going to have the Ford Raptor cops, which I would say nobody probably liked them. You are going to have the really fun Corvette cops and also the Rhino thing that comes out. Really like how they actually pop out of nowhere. They can wreck your car and stuff. It makes it a lot more interesting when you get higher heat levels. But the thing is, though, losing the police is going to be a tad easier in heat, which I know I can probably have like arguments and stuff like that of going, well, bro, it shouldn't be easy. Like, Unbound is still going to be a lot harder in some ways. The thing is, Unbound is actually going to be more annoying in a way than actually being difficult. One thing I've always laughed at games is, yes, the game can be hard, but there's going to be a pretty interesting line from being difficult and then annoying. That's something players probably don't really want to mess with. I'm actually trying to have a fun factor here, messing with cops, doing races, going after something and actually having the police on me in my favorite car. That's probably why I always go back to Heat and do the actual chases on there, and I'm really not focusing on it with Need for Speed Unbound. That's probably going to be because the overall police chasing with the race design, the way your heat level goes up, you can get parts and stuff like that from the events, and you also can make a little money on top of it going at nighttime. You can actually make more money doing all of that in heat and having fun with the police involved. And if you go back on Unbound, you're probably going to have like a chore trying to do the events. You legitimately drive 25 feet and boom, you're going to have cops on you again. You're actually going to have helicopters everywhere, all kinds of stuff. I just feel like the initial design with the police in Heat were so much better than Unbound, and I do feel like people would most likely agree with this. Now, the last thing I did want to talk about in this video is going to be the initial leveling design of the cars and the classes themselves. Now, we all do know in racing games, one of the biggest goals is to have the fastest car you can get, right? I mean, we all do know most people are probably going to have maxed out level 400 vehicles in Heat. We also saw that in something like Payback because, well, going after the maxed and fastest vehicle is kind of a goal. Why would you actually have an underpowered car when you can max it out and make it quicker? The difference in Unbound, though, is having like A+, S, and all that. You're probably going to want to have a car in that specific category that can actually do those races. This is actually going to make a lot of sense for like a multiplayer standpoint, but I would say a lot of people might look at that and go, okay, so if I have to use a B-rated vehicle, I will. If I have to use an S-rated vehicle, I will. But we all do know if they actually added regular game modes with like the maxed out classes, most of the time I have noticed people tend to use like S+, unless they are going to be forced to use something like an S or an A-rated vehicle in a playlist. I would say, like, yeah, if you're doing a low-level playlist, like a featured one, then yeah, you're probably going to use a B-rated vehicle in it. That does make sense. But at the end of the day, though, most players are probably going to want to use a maxed-out vehicle because we all do know in Heat, the number one thing is to have, like, the best engine swap or having your car being maxed out so you can be the fastest there because you're probably going to want to have the fastest time in the races. If you actually do multiplayer, most people want to be the quickest. And that's probably why most of the time in like Heat, if you do like a multiplayer event, you are most likely going to have to pick the fastest car that you own to compete. Now, the one downside to that, and one thing I actually like about Unbound in this aspect, is you can actually do like budget builds or something. Like if you're talking to your friend, you could be like, yo bro, let's do like an A plus build on like the Civic or something. You can only have a certain amount of parts on it, you have a certain amount of horsepower, and then you can actually drag race and stuff and do different types of builds with like lower ranks and all that to see how some of the other cars stack up when they're not completely maxed out. So in ways, I do actually like the way they actually did it. Now, I am curious though, what do you guys think about the leveling system in Unbound? How could you actually make it better than how it was in this game? Like if they were to make another Need for Speed game, which I would say they probably are, but again, it's probably over a year plus away. I'm thinking 2026. What would be the best way to actually have a leveling system for the vehicle classes in that game? Do let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. Overall, I'm also curious to know what you guys think about the design of Need for Speed Heat versus something like Need for Speed Unbound. Which game do you guys actually think did it better? What are some of the cons and pros of each of them? And I do actually have to say this one last thing. I really do actually believe if they were to update Need for Speed Heat before, like when that game did come out, and they didn't cut that game short, I felt like it could be one of the best racing games of the modern era. Now that might sound a bit insane, but I do feel like the core design of that game was so dang good, and if they actually built upon it, added more stuff to it, I felt like that game could have been absolutely incredible. Now we all do know that Need for Speed Unbound's multiplayer is easily going to be better than Heat's, but that's also going to come down to what I did say before, and that is going to come down to the fact of Need for Speed Unbound actually getting the proper updates after it did end up releasing. Even though we all probably thought this game was most likely going to be doomed, and then boom, they actually gave us an entire year of updates, which I have to admit is pretty dope. But we can't all agree though, imagine the previous 2 or 3 Need for Speed games getting the proper updates to make them even better. Let's be real, they honestly didn't.